City, not to be confused with the country Benin, is the capital of the Edo state in southern Nigeria. The Kingdom of Benin was the most stable and influential monarchies in West Africa before its annexation by Britain in February 1897.
Benin City is especially well known for being home to the Benin Bronzes, or ama in the Edo language, which were relief plaques made of brass, bronze and similar alloys. The vast majority were created between 1500 and 1650 and were made either for the royal altars of the obas, or the king's ancestors, or for decoration of the royal palace's wooden pillars. They depict a plethora of scenes, ranging from warrior parades to cattle sacrifice to battle rituals.
But what did the Benin Bronzes actually mean? They're very culturally and historically significant to the Benin people of the Edo state.
The plaques served as a kind of mnemonic record, showcasing important figures and events in their history. For example, this plaque shows how the Benin people perceived the Portuguese in the 16th century.
They had comparatively pointed noses, beards, and unique clothes that made them stand out compared to the other plaques.
According to the British Museum, the presence of the Portuguese on the plaques show how they were representative of the Oba's wealth, power and status.
This was because the Oba controlled all trade in and out of Benin City, so trade became associated with royal authority.
This makes sense, as the first Portuguese arrived in Nigeria's coastal territories in 1485. This marked the beginning of a 400-year-long trade, which was largely considered peaceful.
While Benin City provided pepper, ivory, leopard skins, and enemies of the Oba in terms of trade, the Portuguese would provide brass ingots that would come to make the Benin Bronzes.
Therefore, not only did the bronzes represent the Oba's status, but also represented a way for the royal families to cement their place in history and to tell their history the way they want to.
The brass they were made from was in itself controlled, with sumptuary laws controlling who could purchase and cast it. Only individuals of certain class were able to cast and use bronze products, cementing the bronzes as an indicator of power and status for the Igbo people.
Not all of the bronzes depict foreigners and the ruling elite, however. Many show images of warriors.
For example, this plaque shows three men, and the outer two appear to be warriors. They are wearing collars of leopard's teeth, which gave them spiritual protection in battle. The leopard was also generally an important symbol, as it was considered the king of the tropical forest. The Yoruba would typically keep leopards, and they are occasionally depicted on the bronzes to highlight the Yoruba's dominion of rural areas as well as the cities.
Other indicators that these are warriors include their patterned wraparound skirts and beaded anklets.
Moving on, in this plaque here, it depicts an Oba and his attendants, likely participating in one of the annual public ceremonies conducted around the palace. We can tell that the central figure is an Oba based on the coral beaded regalia, and he is protected from enemies or the sun by shields, which is a privilege reserved only for the king.
The fact that he's on a horse means that this is Oba Ezeji, who ruled from around 1504 to 1550 and was the first Oba to ride a horse. But because the original order of the bronzes is lost, or at least unclear, we don't know if it was him or a later Oba who copied this mode of transportation.
This plaque is also especially interesting because it displays something called hierarchic scale, where the figure's size indicates their status. You've seen here, here, and here. This is something also seen in ancient Egyptian, Byzantine, and medieval Christian art.
Therefore, the bronzes are quite historically significant by providing visual records of a culture that largely communicated through oral traditions. This leads us on to the next question. Why are the majority of the bronzes in London rather than their country of origin?
Are you guys familiar with the Benin Bronzes? It was in the Africa exhibit. They're like a series of plaques from Nigeria.
Personally, I didn't see it. No. I was prepared for visit this part, so I didn't see it.
Pretty much the same.
Are you guys familiar with the Benin Bronzes in the Africa exhibit?
No, we're
actually
not.
Have you guys heard of what the Benin Bronzes themselves are, the objects?
Oh, I haven't.
The British Museum, an incredibly iconic neoclassical institution symbolic of British history. Highly controversial, the British Museum has long had calls to return items and artefacts. with the first formal calls being as early as 1983, with the Greek government requesting sculptures to be returned to the Acropolis Museum.
If you take the stairs down to the Africa exhibit, you can see a wall dedicated to Benin Bronzes and West African memorabilia.
In February of 1897, a British punitive expedition raided Benin City and effectively annexed Nigeria for the British Empire. According to the letters from James Robert Phillips and Acting Commissioner Galloway to the British Foreign Office, Britain's main motivation was dominated by economic interest and the opening up of trade.
Your need for wider foreign markets was perfectly matched with Benin's abundance of raw materials, including palm oil kernels, rubber, ivory, cola nuts, etc. Harold Blindloss referred to Benin as England's future wealth and greatness. Despite their original reluctance to fully annex Benin due to new taxations and regulations, it seemed the coastal commerce was deemed most important. This was emphasised by previous failed missions to open up trade and rising interest in palm oil kernels.
However, as the Oba controlled all trade, Britain's armed punitive expedition aimed to open up trade into Nigeria's interior areas, and they used extreme violence after the failure of Philip's mission in 1896. The raid ended when the Oba was captured by the British, and they destroyed the royal palace. They took away almost all of the bronzes, including other works in wood and ivory. They were then taken to the British Museum, where 900 of them remain today.
Start with asking you guys how old you are.
I am 24 years old.
I'm 26.
Okay. And can I just ask why you guys are visiting the British Museum today, or why you're visiting London?
For tourist purposes, because everybody is talking about it, so we just want to see what's the hype behind it.
Oh, okay. And have you been inside yet, or are you going to go in? Okay.
No, we're going in.
Okay. What are you guys planning on visiting?
Nothing specific. Honestly, everything that there is to see, because we're not really sure what's there to see at the moment. So.
Okay, so most of the exhibitions are divided by country or region. Our project is actually on the Benin Bronzes in the Africa section. Are you guys familiar with those? They're from Nigeria.
I am from Africa. I know Nigeria, but I'm from South Africa. But yeah, I am familiar with Africa, so that would be cool.
Okay, yes. Cool.
Is it like a resource mineral?
No, they're relics and plaques. They were raided by the British in 1897 on a punitive expedition. They were raided from Benin City in Nigeria. If you guys do go in, please feel free to visit. Do you mind if we ask you a bit more complicated questions? Is that okay? So obviously the British Museum is a huge symbol of British culture and history, but a lot of the relics and objects are looted from Britain's colonial and imperial past. Do you guys have any opinions on if the objects, like for example the Benin Bronzes, which were raided in a very violent expedition, do you think they belong in the British Museum, or do you think they should be returned back to their origin, or do you think it's a bit more of a nuanced debate? Like, give us your opinions.
I think the gruesome act of like raiding stuff is a bit unfair. But I think it's good for exposure purposes to have like minerals all over the world so people actually know for historical purposes and educational purposes. I think it's good. But as to the act itself of how the minerals and stuff for resources were acquired, I'm not entirely sure if I agree with that. But yeah, maybe it could have been done in a more friendly, punctual way, just to ask for it as opposed to forcefully taking it. So I think it could have been done in a better way, but I think it's still okay that now that they are here, it's good for educational purposes that they stay here.
Okay. I think like one things like here, like you can like I normally don't go to museum and see stuff about history or historical things, but like now you're here, like you actually see it, and like those kind of historical events need to be known, I guess. So like better I'm not saying that it should be here in London, but I don't know like if but it needs to be known, and it's good that it's in a place where people mostly come. So yeah.
All right, well, thank you guys so much. Hi guys, so thank you for being part of this interview. Just a few questions. First of all, how old are you guys and why did you come to the museum today?
20. We're 20, and then we came here to see Picasso's print exhibition.
Okay, cool. So is that the only exhibit you visited today? Or do you visit anything else?
Oh yeah, we just came for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is this your first time in the museum?
No.
Okay. In your other visits, what other exhibits have you looked at?
So we came here last year as a school trip.
School trip.
Yeah, like a uni trip, just to like look at different exhibitions for like inspiration for our project.
Okay, cool. So, sorry, can I just ask what university are you guys at?
UAL.
UAL.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. And have you ever visited the Africa exhibit?
We
Africa,
might have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Totally,
Yeah, we have.
Okay, cool. So have you visited the Benin Bronzes? It's like a wall of plaques, bronze plaques near the back.
No,
No?
I
We don't
think
really
so.
remember.
No, I don't think
Okay. How old you are and why you're visiting the British Museum today?
I'm 24 years old,
Okay.
and we're visiting the British Museum because we want to see the Asian part.
Okay, cool. Are you a tourist or do you live in London?
Yeah, we're tourists.
Okay. Where are you from?
I'm staying in Germany.
Okay, cool.
I
Yeah.
study at Munich.
Okay, awesome. And what did you look at specifically in the British Museum today?
Oh, we only look at the section of Asia and the main part of China.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
That's
that's
awesome.
all.
Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, if I can say it, they stole some.
They stole some
Yeah,
artifacts.
some artifacts.
So
from China,
actually,
so-
that's what our project is on.
Yeah.
It's on stolen artifacts by the British Museum. So do you have any opinions on that? What did you think?
Yeah, if you know, there's a cave in China, east of China, called Dunhuang,
Yeah.
and there's a cave called Mogaoku,
Mhm.
if you know that. So I was there last summer, and I visited the whole cave.
Okay.
There were some objects in the cave, but most of them were stolen from, I guess, in the 15th, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. So the British Museum doesn't really have a right to those, or
Nah,
no?
nah.
Yeah. Okay.
And they didn't make it really right
Yeah.
about the description,
Mhm.
also the
Interesting.
history.
Okay. Yeah, you think that they were inaccurate with their
Yeah,
descriptions?
yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. And have you visited the Africa exhibit at all?
Nah, I didn't
No.
have time for
No,
that.
yeah,
sorry.
okay. Okay. That's cute. Being part of our interview today, can I just ask how old you are, what university you go to, and why you're visiting the British Museum today?
Yep, so I'm 18. I go to UCL. I
Okay.
study architecture, and I'm here today to look at the Egyptian
Okay.
section of the
Cool.
museum.
Is this your first time visiting the museum?
No, I've been here so many times I've
Yeah.
lost count.
Yeah. In your previous visits, what exhibits have you normally looked at?
Just all of them, to be honest.
All of
We
them?
usually go to the art exhibitions.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Have you been to the Africa exhibit? It's downstairs.
yeah, I have, but a long time ago, so
Yeah.
I don't remember.
So
much.
you don't remember much. Do you remember like seeing a wall of bronze plaques, the Benin Bronzes?
No.
No. Do you know what? Have you heard of them outside of the museum?
No.
This brings us to the entire purpose of this video. What is the significance of the bronzes being in the museum for such a long period of time?
The main argument for the bronzes remaining in the museum has been that the museum has the facilities that current-day Benin City doesn't have.
This argument in itself reflects and reinforces the colonial mindset of the British Empire in deeming itself superior and able, despite not harming or truly understanding the complexity and history of the bronzes.
Additionally, within Nigeria, there are debates on whether the bronzes should be returned to the main museum or to their local communities which they originated from.
Now, while this debate does support the British Museum's argument for keeping the bronzes, it also emphasises the prolonged effects of imperialism and marks instability within colonised areas.
Thus, it could be said that the Benin Bronzes' initial meaning and symbolism has transformed into something completely different, something bigger and more significant.
The bronzes arguably now symbolise human interconnectivity in this cosmopolitan world, and this is what makes the situation and solutions even more difficult.
I believe that the British Museum does not need to possess over 900 of these artefacts, especially as the majority of them are not on display to the public. Therefore, I believe a substantial amount of them should be returned to their place of origin, Nigeria. However, I do believe that it is important to retain some of the bronzes in some formats, because it does remind and teach us of the brutality of the British Empire and colonialism in general.
I believe that the majority of the Benin Bronzes should be returned as it's such a large collection. However, the British Museum should retain some of the collection as a way for Britain to take accountability. By sending them all back, it would act as though they were sweeping it under the rug and allowing an important portion of history to be forgotten. Therefore, by keeping some of the collection in the British Museum, it serves as a reminder of Britain's brutal and colonial past. However, the problem cannot be completely solved, as all of them cannot be returned due to private collections.
Given the fact that there are so many of the bronzes in the archives that are not even on display, I do not understand why it's difficult to send some back. However, it's clear to me that the British Museum don't really understand what the bronzes are from the content display on the wall next to the bronzes. So I do believe it would be more beneficial to send them back to Nigeria. However, it is a very complex situation, especially since might be better to send them back to like the local areas where they came from, and so people can learn about their origins and the context and what the Benzes actually are and what it meant in the context of the Yoruba Kingdom. But I do believe that this is just the beginning, and it will take a really long time to like solve, considering that the bronzes were looted like 2 centuries ago. So yeah.
So I do believe that the majority of the bronzes should be returned to Nigeria. I think a really common argument against this that we actually saw in the roundtable discussion is that Nigeria, specifically Benin City, doesn't have the resources to house the number of bronzes that are available. But actually there's a new museum, the Museum of West African Art, being built, and it's going to be finished in May 2025. And that's meant to be like showcasing contemporary West African and ancient West African art. So I think that's going to be a perfect place to hold the bronzes, but also it brings kind of a new frontier to the debate. For example, looking at to what extent can an institution do justice to a bronze, to an artifact. So the bronzes themselves are very, obviously as we know, very rich in their history and culture. But I would argue that the British Museum does not do justice to that. So we talked to some people in the street interviews, and they did say that the exhibits that they looked at, for example the China exhibit, they weren't very accurate with what they were saying. So I do believe that the British Museum should house some of the plaques, but only if they're actually accurate in the labels and the history. So I could argue that, one would argue that if the plaques were moved back to Nigeria, then local knowledge, local history and context would produce more accurate histories of the plaques. And I think that is more important. As a history student myself, it really irritates me when an institution as famous as the British Museum does not go all the way in producing accurate historical information. So I think while it is very important to talk about the colonial legacy and imperial legacy of the bronzes in the British Museum, it's also very important to acknowledge what they are as historical artefacts.
Debates such as the one surrounding the Benin Bronzes are very relevant today as they touch upon subjects such as cultural restitution, how to handle collections in museums, and touch on topics such as colonialism and bring to light wounds between nations and people. I think that while there is no definite answer to this question, I think the debates will go on for quite some time. There is the possibility of long-term loans forwarded by a bunch of different scholars that I tend to agree with. I think that giving maybe 2/3 of the artifacts back to Nigeria would help at least acknowledge the colonial past and acknowledge the looting of the objects, while also giving Nigeria some of their artworks back. But also having some things remain in the British Museum might calm the waters here as well.
It needs to be on go.
Go.
But what did the Benin Bronzes actually mean? They're very culturally and historically significant to the Benin people of the Edo State.
Year-long trade, which was largely considered peaceful.
Well, Benin City provided pepper, ivory, leopard skins, and enemies of the Oba in terms of trade. The Portuguese provided the brass ingots that would make Benin Bronzes.
I'm doing acting.
Victoria. Guys have some thing. This brings us to the entire purpose of this video. What?
I think it's cute. Well, oh, I'm still recording. Okay.
We're just waving.
This is so. Cut the sound off of this as well.